you struggling to find your true identity and purpose while living in the shadow of a powerful parental figure or overbearing society that constantly positions itself as the know-it-all parent? Welcome to We Are Already Free, the podcast that sparks your inner guide to break free from internal and external limitations. I'm Nathan Maingard, your host, bringing you authentic conversations with edge walkers who defy societal norms simply by living their rooted truth. Together, let's shake off limiting beliefs and embrace the freedom within, empowering you to transform your life and deeply connect with yourself and the world. Let the transformation begin. In this must-listen episode of the We Are Already Free podcast, I dive deep with Daniel Maté. Daniel Maté is a Vancouver-born, Brooklyn-based author, composer, lyricist, podcaster, and self-described mental chiropractor. With his father, Dr. Gabor Maté, he co-authored the New York Times bestselling book, The Myth of Normal: Trauma, Illness, and Healing in a Toxic Culture. His theater songwriting has received the prestigious Edward Kleban Prize, an ASCAP Cole Porter Award, and the Jonathan Larson Grant. He co-hosts the Lyric Appreciation podcast, Let's Get Lyrical with Carice and Daniel, along with Carice van Houten of Game of Thrones fame. His popular mental chiropractic service, Take a Walk with Daniel, helps people all over the world get unstuck by means of a quick and potent realignment of perspective while walking. In this raw and intimate conversation, Daniel shares his journey of self-discovery, the impact of having a prominent father, and how he has navigated the complexities of their relationship, as well as the challenges of finding personal sovereignty and healing in the face of expectations and societal pressures. Some of the topics we cover are breaking free from the shadow of a powerful parent, the power of vulnerability, how authentic connections lead to personal growth, the art of mental chiropractic, transforming lives with a change in perspective, the making of the myth of normal, how Daniel and Gabor Maté tackled trauma, illness, and healing in a toxic culture, and do listen to the end to hear the story of how an unexpected imprisonment supported Daniel's journey towards finding freedom in the most challenging of circumstances. If you've ever felt the weight of expectations from a strong parent figure or society, or you've struggled to break free from the shadows to claim your own identity, this episode is for you. Embark on a journey of self-discovery, healing, and liberation with Daniel Maté. As you know, doing a podcast takes so many hours of work a week, and I've been doing this as my love for you, for the world, for this message. And I'm also really seeking ways that I can make sure that it supports me and my family financially. So I've accepted my first ever ad sponsor, and it's one I really feel very passionate about because they are literally helping me make this podcast. So I really want to give a big shout out to my sponsor for this episode, my first ever sponsor on an episode of a podcast, to Zencastr, the ultimate web-based podcasting solution. I've saved literally countless hours since I moved onto their platform. If you're thinking about starting a podcast or already have a podcast but are struggling with the time and technicalities of getting good recordings, I recommend Zencastr. Zencastr's modern podcasting stack allows you to do everything you need for your podcast, from record to publish, all in one place. I particularly love how it allows me to record in the best quality, even though the internet connection in my off-grid solar-powered studio is not the most stable. It records tracks locally on my computer and then uploads them for maximum backup and safety. If you've ever lost a recording, you know how much that sucks. So thank you to Zencastr for fixing that problem for me. Their automatic post-production also saves me hours of work and makes me and the guests sound really amazing. Go to Zencastr, that's just zencastr.com/pricing, and use my code WeAreAlreadyFree, and you'll get 30% off your first 3 months of Zencastr Professional. I want you to have the same easy experience as I do for all my podcasting and content needs with Zencastr. It's time to share your story. And if you want to help this podcast eventually be ad-free, you can find a link to Patreon in the show notes, along with links to Daniel and many of the things we discuss in this episode, all available at alreadyfree.me/28. That's just the numbers 28. One last personal note before we begin. This is a deeply, deeply vulnerable podcast episode. Please honor the intention with which it is shared. We both share deeply personal, challenging, and tender parts of ourselves and our family dynamics. Thank you for honoring this, and I thank my family and Daniel's family and all of us who are on this path of regeneration, of healing, of holistic relating. So thank you so much. And now onto this podcast, this community-supported episode with Daniel Maté. And thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate your time and you being willing and available to do this. You've actually been on my friend Josh Sneyman's podcast already.
He might have been the first podcast I did, or one of the first 2 podcasts I did when the book came out. And literally, those were my first podcast appearances really ever, because I'd never been an author before. I'd never really had any sort of reason for people to invite me. That's not true. I'd been on a podcast of a friend of mine who talks about musical theater writing and musical theater history, and I write musicals. So I came when Stephen Sondheim died, I went on and did an interview about that. But as far as this slew of media appearances in the podcast space, Josh was one of my first, and it was really great to just chat with him. He was just it was a great conversation, and I was happy to see that people seemed to respond to it.
Lovely. I'm so glad. He's about to become a coaching client of mine, which I'm actually doing a session with him tomorrow. So I'm looking forward to that. So I'm going to jump straight into the deep end here, because I think the prompting for me to reach out to you was seeing a post about your dad. And I don't remember the exact content, but it struck a chord with me. So my dad is Mark Maingard. He's considered one of the top handmade luthiers in the world. He's a phenomenal master guitar maker. He's been a musician his whole life. His mother was a musician. He's a badass dude. There you go. Yeah, I see the guitars.
You want to trade dads for a couple of weeks?
That could actually be super interesting and fun. I mean, I'm
dad swap, the comedy.
Swap. This would be a podcast we could do together. Yeah, your pops is definitely someone I'm really grateful for the work that he's done and what I've seen of him in the world. And this is kind of what I wanted to dive into with you, because so growing up, my dad was a very big presence. He's a big he's a big I want to say a big ego, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but he has a big personality. He walks into a space and he takes over the space, and he's a Leo, if that's a thing to you or anyone listening, but so I very much felt overshadowed by him. And he's super good at so many things. He's the most skilled with his hands person I think I've ever met. He just seemed, especially when I was a kid, hero worshiping, he just seemed to know everything and have everything. And I never felt like I lived up to that. So I think that I felt a resonance around some of the things you shared around having a big dad. And so I'm just curious to hear whatever comes up for you to share about what your journey has been like with a father that's very much in the public eye in many ways. And then how have you formed your own identity around that? And how have you shifted that dynamic over the years, and where is that at now? I know that's quite a lot of questions in one, but wherever you want to go with that.
Yeah. I mean, that's a huge, huge, huge constellation of topics. Well, so yeah, I mean, there's 2 components to having, a dad who has a big shadow. Actually 3, I would say. Just if you take the word shadow, there's his public persona, the fact that his reputation precedes him, that people know who he is. So people have out there, outside the walls of our home growing up, his name rings out.
Yeah.
So there's a listening of him, you could say, in the world, an expectation of who he is. And now keep in mind, my father was not famous when I was a kid. He was sort of notorious in the Jewish community because he was a Jew who spoke out against Israel's crimes against Palestinians. So he was a pariah in that sense. And I admired and I would say worshipped him for his steadfastness there, although I was also afraid of the rage with which he conducted his activism. I mean, there was kind of a burning, seething, but it was a righteous anger. I mean, but there was something of the energy of it that reminded me of the other aspect of his shadow, but I'll get into that. But so, you say, growing up in the shadow of my father could mean in the shadow of other people's expectations of him, or the shadow of his public image, right? Then there's the fact that, and truly he's become a celebrity in my adulthood, really only in the last 15 years or so. I mean, he was a best-selling author in Canada pretty much from the beginning He started writing 25 years ago, but even then I was already in my 20s, and, until this book, he wasn't going on Rogan. He wasn't doing all these enormous podcasts. So the internet, the 2010s were really the time in which the world found out who he was. But that said, he was still well known in Vancouver as being a doctor and an advocate for the marginalized and things like that. So sure, I did grow up with someone definitely whose name had meaning outside of our walls. Then there's the aspect of just him casting a big shadow just as dad. Like what you're saying, just big personality, takes up a big space. I'm small, he's big. I'm weak, he's strong. He knows how to do things. I don't know how to do things. This is the child's position, right? Those are the facts of the matter. That just comes with the territory. Now that can have different emotional colors to it. That can be a joyful thing if the father is present and there and focused on bringing the child along. It can be kind of an intimidating thing if the father is a stern taskmaster, but maybe there's still a sense of tutelage and love that's transmitted, like wanting that, but maybe it's tough love, whatever. It can also be very alienating because if the child feels disconnected from the father, then that huge personality is just this presence in the home, but it's not, for me, it's not connected to me. I don't really get to bask in it, and it feels, it has the tinge of rejection to it because the child needs connection to the father. I'm reading a really great novel right now by my favorite American novelist, Russell Banks, who passed away earlier this month. And it's called Cloud Splitter. And it's about John Brown, the American abolitionist, sort of mercenary white man who attacked slave owners and tried to free black slaves. And he was a real fanatic. He was a real religious fanatic. But the son is, and fanatic for justice, and equality. But he believed he was on a mission from God. And the book is narrated by his son, Owen.
Oh, wow.
And what's remarkable so far in the book is just the relationship between the father and son. And here's a father who cast a big shadow in both of those ways, publicly and especially after all the events take place and he was hanged and all this. And the son was swept along and became part of his anti-slave rebellion movement. He worked alongside his father. But the father also cast a big shadow as the authority figure. But what's lovely is it depicts the affection of that. And my dad often says, if you want to instill discipline in your children, make them your disciples. And I like that play on words because it turns out that's where the word discipline comes from. So ideally, there would be that. If there's going to be authority, which there should be, right? Or there could be in the archetypal father-son relationship, it would be done with love, with tenderness, with intention, because, a leader cares for their disciples. They don't abuse their disciples. They don't minimize their disciples. They're trying to actually empower them to continue on, like what was Jesus doing with his disciples? He had a very express intention. And if he's going to break their hearts, he's going to break their hearts to build them up again and to get them ready to carry on when he's gone, So I think ideally that's what the father figure would do. So there's that kind of shadow growing up in the loving, nurturing shadow. And then there's the Jungian meaning of the word shadow, which is we grow up in the presence of our father's darkness, in the shadow that the parts of him that he doesn't tend to himself cast, in the shadow of his rages, in the shadow of his depressions, in the shadow of his, for some fathers, or for some sons, they grow up in the shadow of their father's indulgences and peccadillos and inabilities to control himself, or maybe they grow up in the shadow of the wreckage he's left behind or his abuse, So I'd say off the top of my head, those are the three valences, I would say, of the word shadow. I haven't answered your question about me, but I just kind of wanted to lay out that groundwork for myself so I could map myself onto each one. When it comes to the second one, in terms of just the loving shadow of like the protective shadow, like the shadow of sitting beneath a tall, sturdy oak tree, I think that's the kind that all sons would like to be in until we're ready to step out into the sun ourselves, so to speak, into the sun. Hamlet, as he said, I am too much in the sun, double meaning on that word. I remember that from high school, Shakespeare, maybe college. There was some of that. There wasn't enough of it growing up. It was intermittent because my father could be a very loving presence when we were playing soccer or when we were raking leaves or when we were going for hikes, doing physical things outside. On the other hand, he could be not attuned and not tuned into who I was and absent and trying to impose activities on me that I didn't want to do and not being attuned to my sensitivity and then sometimes mocking me for my sensitivity. And he thought he was just being playful and joking, but just not knowing the difference between when a child is genuinely with you emotionally and when the child is starting to dissociate or retreat within themselves out of defense and violating that boundary. Because a true authority figure in the good sense will know where the boundary is and will know that to bring your disciple along, you got to respect where they're at. And that's what the ideal father would do. And my father, respecting boundaries has never been one of his strong suits as a person and certainly not as a father. And that's partly an ADD trait. That's partly due to his own, it's entirely due to his own upbringing and conditioning and probably his brain development, if you believe his work. And I have no reason not to. So in that respect, there wasn't enough of a protective shadow. In the sense of his public image, well, no, let me go to the third one first, actually, because these are the ones that are closest to home. And I think they influence the way a child is going to experience the public image. So the third one, in terms of the Jungian shadow, that was the shadow that was most reliable, you could say. I always knew that my dad's dark side was going to come back and that it would dominate. When it took over, it completely dominated, like a cloud system that just completely takes over a sunny day, and it could blow in from any direction on any kind of wind at any time. Took the form of rages, took the form of sullen silences, took the form of workaholic absences, took the form of just protracted screaming fights with my mother in plain view of us or while we were in bed or in a restaurant. Absolutely no inhibition, no social or no capacity to say something is more important to me than offloading my feelings right now. So when I'm in a mood, when I'm in a feeling, that is licensed to just no capacity, actually. It's just a lack of competence, emotional competence, I would say. And both my parents had it, although my mom was much more conscious that, hey, there are children here. But because she was in a really fused relationship with my father for many, many years, something they're still working through, but are much, much better at now, she could do very little to protect us. And she's often said, and she said it publicly, that she wishes if she had known herself better, if she'd believed in herself more, if she'd been more attuned to what we needed, she would have left him when we were kids. And that would have been, at the time, it would have been for the best. I'm glad they're together now. They're great for each other now. But, there was a time when it was just, the returns had diminished on having two parents who lived together. So I was often unprotected from my father's dark side, that aspect of his shadow. And once it took the form of him hitting me in front of the entire family. And he's told this story many times. I have now revoked his license to tell it anymore. It's my story to tell. I told him on a podcast last week that I'm revoking your license to talk about my trauma publicly. You can talk about your parenting, but the incidents that happened, those things happened to me. So thank you very much. I'm taking them back. And he respected that. It was good. So, that level of terror, what is terrorism except, striking fear into the hearts of people that anything could happen to you at any time, so you better obey. So that was a fact. That was a feature of my early life, along with the beautiful, loving, playful father. We would wrestle with him. It was great. There was so many great times. But the fact that I couldn't count on them to insulate me from the other stuff meant that they were tenuous and I couldn't fully trust them, so I couldn't fully trust him, so I couldn't fully trust myself. It always just is the case that Jungian shadow, that dark side, unless it's really managed and accounted for and really atoned for when it takes over, if there's real restitution, if the father's able to say, I really lost it there. That's not who I want to be to you. That's not your fault. But that wouldn't happen. What would happen is he'd blow up, he'd lose it, and then he'd come back to me and tell me how much he loved me. Well, that's actually what abusers do. That's what narcissists do. I'm not accusing them of being either of those things. It's a spectrum. And it also indicates a lack of maturity and a lack of awareness of your impact on other people and what other people need, especially children. So I didn't get that repair, which meant that then the good times were still built on an even shakier foundation, which leads me to the first one. I'm giving you a very detailed answer here. I've never really framed any of this way, so I appreciate the question because I always like getting to wonder about things in new ways and phrase things differently. This will be useful to write about in our book that we're writing about adult parent-child relationships, which is our next book. His public image. Well, for me, the emperor has never had any clothes. So his public persona has always made me very uncomfortable, both on the level of a kind of cynicism about it. Now, these days, you know what? I actually see the impact he's making and has made in the world. I believe people when they tell me that he's saved their life or he's saved their children from all kinds of, unwitting trauma downloads, or that he's changed their life. Millions of people, really. I get that. And the more his work gets out there, this documentary about him, The Wisdom of Trauma, it's powerful stuff. And he has a gift and he's giving it to the world. And that is beautiful. And I admire that. I don't worship it anymore. I admire it. It's a good thing to do with one's life, especially when one is born during the Holocaust. It's admirable. It's heroic. Good for him. It really is good for him, and it's good for the world. When I get a little prickly sometimes is when people tell me, I would love to have him for a father. You're so lucky. Well, on one level, I completely get that. There are qualities he has, at least. Well, no, he does. But what they're really saying is, I would love to have his public persona for a father.
Right.
Because there is, but that doesn't exist. Yeah. That doesn't exist for any famous person. So but basically what they're saying is, I would love to have my projection of him for a father. And I know from firsthand experience that that's impossible. That's not a thing. Because you have to have a father in the private space. And it's a very different thing to be a father than it is to be a healer out there in the world. And to deliver true things and whatever. And you look at, Deepak Chopra's son made a scathing documentary about his father on tour. Alice Miller, the Swiss psychiatrist who wrote The Drama of the Fucking Gifted Child. I added the expletive there. It's not in the title. Her son has written about the terrible abuse he suffered or whatever. That I haven't read it, but really, again, kind of exposed. So it's a universal thing. It's not a failing of my dad's, a particular failing, but it is a real dynamic that is inescapable for me. So I can't really metabolize those. I can't take seriously those things. And the things that bug me the most, but of course it also comes with the territory that I've signed up for, and it's part of my job, being his collaborator, especially on the subject of parent and adult-child relationships, is that people are going to make me wrong for the ways in which I cope and sometimes stand up to him, sometimes in public, which is a part of our work. It's kind of showing the dynamic. We let it all hang out. Now, we're not trying to make a big show of our friction, but there used to be a time when we started doing this where we couldn't help it. We didn't have the capacity. Again, like I said, my parents didn't have the competence to hide it. Well, we did our best, but some of it would spill out on stage, and then we would make it part of the workshop. We'd do our best. But when people see me bristling, when people see me interrupting him, when people see me clapping back at him, what they're seeing, if they're projecting from a place of guilt towards their parents or resentment towards their children, they're going to project and see an ungrateful, spoiled child, a puerile 47-year-old man, or however old I was at the time, who doesn't appreciate his world-famous, world-saving savior father. Now, others will take a look and they will see the microaggressions, to use a completely, at this point, banal term, but it means something to some people. And I can get what it means just from my own experience, because these are subtle things that other people wouldn't see. But some people who have the eyes to see them watch YouTube, and you see in the comments, I had to turn it off. I didn't realize Gabor was such an asshole, or could be. I didn't realize he was so self-absorbed. I really felt for Daniel. I saw that. I don't think other people saw that. Well, about a third of the people see it. And a third of the people only see my more macro aggressions, because it's not I've always had to be extra demonstrative to get through to him. So it's just the dynamic. And then the other third, or most of them, are just like, I see you both. You're both lovable. This is such a contribution. And then a tiny portion are like, fuck both these guys. So one of my ways of defending myself as a child, and I'm trying to grow out of it or redeploy it into a much healthier kind of communication, and it's still a challenge, is pointing out that the emperor has no clothes. Fuck you, I won't do what you tell me. Fuck you, you don't even do what you tell me. Like the hypocrisy, the emptiness of it, and pleading my case, and all of that, and the fact that sometimes he believes his own hype, that he gets high on his own supply when he comes home from a speaking tour and he's gotten standing ovations and whatever else. Well, historically, that gets me a little spicy. And there's a part of me that wants to wrest him down to earth. And I have compassion for that part of me. And growing up means, okay, well, what's my real intention? And how effective is my current approach? So I just gave you, I think, like a 20-minute answer. But that's what you get for asking me such a big question.
That was utterly on me, Daniel. Thank you so much for diving so deep and really breaking it down into such beautiful clarifications. I really appreciate it. I feel such a deep resonance with so much of what you said around. I'll respond to this last piece. Obviously, we could go in infinite directions with such a rich kind of tapestry of history and information. And what comes up for me is the sense of that in my adult life. So as a young person, my parents started getting divorced, and I say that when I was about 10, and it went on and off for 8 years. And it was, pretty much as bad as it gets in terms of like the kids being pawns in a battle, and
especially on and off. Jesus.
Oh, mate, it was rough. And throughout it, I really chose my dad, because in many ways he was the stable one. My mom left and actually disappeared at one point for 9 months, and there was a whole story around that. And he was the rock, the stability. And I just couldn't, I remember hearing so often when adults would talk about me around me, which people seem to think is cool to do around kids. But I remember hearing that, and it was weird. I was like, they were talking about me, and I was right there. Anyway, and one of the things they would commonly say is, wow, Nathan is such a good kid. Like, he's so well behaved. He's so happy. He's so joyful. He's always just like so positive. And I remember this little feeling inside me of like a little part of me felt, okay, I guess I got to keep that part down. Like, just keep making it smaller. And my mom,
he's gonna have such a wonderful depression when he gets older. I can't wait to see what mental illness he develops, or what autoimmune condition. Oh, it's gonna be great.
Dude, it's literally, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, that has been a part of my story, depression. And anyway,
well, that's what happens when you depress things.
Right, exactly. No, I checked out, man. I fully checked out. And I'm still, I think when I heard you say, like, when you expressed yourself working on this, shifting this pattern, or at least coming into more sort of whole relationship with this pattern, the resonance there for me is checking out. When things become overwhelming for me, I just automatically go into checkout, which is get on my phone or read a book, read fantasy, or just do something where I just don't have to think about it and don't have to feel about it, really, obviously. So, but anyway, what happened was that in my adulthood, in my sort of late 20s, early 30s, where I started getting so angry with my dad, when I was starting to do this work on myself. And he was such a different person by that stage. He'd done massive work on himself, years of therapy, men's work, all the things, so meditation and all the wonderful things. And so now I was angry.
That bastard, he preempted your anger. Now you can't even be angry with him anymore. I can totally relate to that.
Right. That was the feeling of like, I'm angry with someone who doesn't exist anymore. And yet there it was, this prickliness. I actually was called prickly by a lot of people in my family on and off for years. Like people would say, wow, Nathan, you're really prickly. Like it's.
My mom told me that I was a really sweet kid until I was 3, and then I became a porcupine.
Wow.
And I'm like, why do you suppose that is, Mom?
Needing a self-defense. And so the reality then became this process of acknowledging and being kind to myself. There is this anger, and my dad's this beautiful older man who's living a really beautiful, he's surfing, he's gentle. When people meet him, they're like, who's this guy you talk about? Because your dad's so mellow. Like he's so chilled and easygoing. And I'm like, well, it's the shadow, right? Like, and so when I hear you talk about that, I get this resonance of, and it's a very hard one because I want to spend time with my dad. And over these years, we've processed a lot, and now we get on really well. And I do sometimes get really angry, and we have big blowouts, but we're both in it together. It's not like I'm the kid who he's crushing. It's like we're the adults who have stuff that we're navigating together. And I think that's been a really big shift.
For sure. I mean, that is called, well, updating your operating system to be in reality, because that is what's happening. That's called developing competence. That's called respecting yourself and respecting the other without contorting yourself to do so. That's a great foundation. I mean, that's where we are too. In our case, we have this extra incentive to do so because we do this work out in the public. Now, it's not that we need to do it so that we can be a good example. It's that we don't really give a shit about being perfect. We're willing to show things. It's more that our work needs to have integrity, in that if we're going to guide other people through these things, we want to know these things really well, and we want to map out some exits, So we're actually at a place right now. I think we're going to have a mediated conversation this weekend with a mutual friend of ours, because we got to a bit of an impasse last week. And it wasn't clear to me that he was capable of hearing me, no matter how succinctly, responsibly, comprehensively, and generously and responsibly I communicated. And, his response to my final sort of long email expressing my grievance, which of course itself is a holdover from childhood. I used to have to write them the longest letters in order to even get any kind of, for them to relent in making me wrong. So if I could express myself in a lot of words very clearly, then I would get them back on my side, which itself is a kind of trauma, because the child shouldn't have to work so hard. It's kind of maybe how I became a writer. I'm very good at it. But his response to my last one was, I'm really tired, Daniel. It's late here. I'm flying tomorrow. We're traveling. Let's pick this up soon. I'm sure we can work this out. And I was like, okay, well, look, you're 79 years old. You're busy. You're traveling. That's fine. You didn't rebuff my communication, but you're deferring, responding to it. And the next day I realized, you know what? We're going to need help with this one. I actually don't. I respect you enough to not try to force you to digest what I just said all by yourself. And I don't trust myself to be able to take your response in a way that's not, because I'm so activated right now, that having a third there would really, really make a difference.
Yeah. What is some of the tools? So because you're talking about these processes, like one of them having a mediated conversation, which I'm in a process right now with a man who's, I don't know very well, but there's a potential that I have big feelings. There's a charge, and I'm actually feeling quite scared. As I'm saying this, I'm connecting it to our conversation and realizing in some ways, I think I have seen him as a bit of a father figure, and I'm feeling some of those old feelings of that I'm not enough and that I'm the one who's fucked up and I did it wrong and it's all my fault. And oh my God, so it's interesting to notice that. And one of the things I'm considering is a mediated conversation. And so what I'm curious about is, what are some of the tools that you've used along the way that you might recommend to others that have supported you in having an actual authentic relationship with your dad?
Well, this is one of the places where I am fortunate because I have a father who's willing to engage in this stuff on this level. Not everyone does. I mean, first of all, not everyone has a living father. Those who do, not everyone has a father who's in their life. And sometimes there are very good reasons for that. In fact, probably there are always good reasons. The question is, does it have to be that way? And for some people, it does. What are the tools? Well, it starts with an intention. It starts with being able to imagine the possibility of something more true and more updated and more grounded into adults. And at least one person has to have a glimmer of that possibility. It doesn't take mutuality necessarily. I always say in the workshop, it takes two to tango. It takes one not to. Which means the old dance steps, if you stop dancing, you step off the dance floor, the music's going to stop and the other person's going to be like, what's going on? And that takes something because we always want to have it be 50-50. Well, you're still doing, well, if you want to have a miserable relationship with your parents, have it be 50-50. If you want to have one with a chance of it being satisfying, have it be 100-100, which means just have it be 100 because you can't do shit about their 100 and it's really not your place to judge it. So whatever they're giving you, that's their 100.
Oh, I love that, man. So I actually had that. That was the turning point for me in this storyline of this anger towards my dad. And I'd been working on myself and working. And again, so grateful I have a dad who's available, and who's done work and understands structures of sort of conscious communication, etc. So we did a piece where we sat down. I said, I have some things I need to share with you. And we sat down, we had a chance to each speak and share our piece. And I had this realization while I was speaking. I was like, I'm scared when I walk into the room when I know you're there, because I'm scared I'm going to do something wrong. And I was so terrified about it, and I let it. And as I was speaking, I was crying, and it was, wow, what a release. And afterwards, he's like, well, thank you for sharing. He said, and I just, that story is no longer my story. He's like, I've done my work on that stuff. I don't carry it anymore. And he has apologized to me at different times. But in that moment, the lesson that he gave to me through his own 100%, as you say, was that he wasn't going to go, oh, I'm so sorry, Nathan. I fucked it up. Whatever the thing was that I was looking for subconsciously, it was like he wasn't going to fulfill some box that he needed to tick. And that freed me. I was like, my dad is doing the best he can, and he's here now, and I really fucking enjoy him. So, wow, let's just let go. Let's let go a little.
That's great. Well, it let go of you. Another Shakespeare quote I love, the quality of mercy is not strained. Same thing goes for forgiveness. Forgiveness happens when the conditions are right. You can't force yourself to forgive somebody. The debt gets forgiven. The tax gets forgiven. The toll it's taking on us, and we get released. But there is a nuance here that I think is important for many people listening, especially those who don't feel like they have a parent who's, game for this, but even those who do, and I'm still wrestling with this one, and I don't quite know how to nail this one, like how to totally stick the landing on it, but I know it's important. Something I'm going to explore in the writing of this book, I think. And I think that's why it's coming up. It's also possible to err too much on the side of, oh, bygones are bygones. Because bygones are not bygones sometimes. It starts, first of all, you have to acknowledge the material facts of the matter, which is that this is the least equal start to a relationship imaginable. No other relationship in your life, every single other relationship in your life, except maybe teachers, but you don't have to keep having a relationship with teachers. That's limited time. This is open-ended, and it starts without your consent. You weren't around to consent when the idea of you was conceived, nor the physical reality of you was conceived. They made all the choice. And you didn't get to select who they were. Now, they didn't get to select who you were either, in all fairness, but, they had influence on the genetic material, and, they were the ones who ostensibly were setting up the environment for you to grow and learn and be conditioned. And of course, most parents, especially young ones, don't get to make conscious choices about that because they're carrying their own trauma. But the fact is, there's no parity in the origins of this relationship. Your nervous system was conditioned by theirs, not the other way around. You don't owe them anything. Or at least you didn't when you were born. any notion that you did is traumatic because it's a complete offense against nature. They owed you everything in the sense that you needed what they had, and nature would have them give it to you. And of course, circumstances, and both psychological and material in our current world especially, get in the way of that. That's what our entire book, The Myth of Normal, is about. So, in other words, for most of us, in a sense, the relationship started off with no choice and with some huge disappointments of expectation. Not conscious expectation, neural expectation, nervous system expectation. Our system needed it like lungs need air. The difference is our psyches can cope. We can find ways to adjust. And the ways we adjusted became our neuroses. They became our issues. They became sometimes our physical and mental ailments. So there's just absolutely no equality or parity in the origins of the relationship. Okay, well, you could say, well, fine, that's how it started, but now it's the adult child's job to see the parent as a fallible human being and to let go. That's fine as far as it goes. And certainly in the personal development path, I don't want my healing to be contingent on anything coming from my parents. And that would be true whether they're in my life or not in my life, alive or dead, sane or demented, healthy or addicted. It doesn't matter. If I'm trying to get reparations for something that will never happen again, which is I'm a child and I didn't get what I needed, I'm fucked. So that is true. But like any psychological or spiritual truism, if it becomes dogma, it becomes a lie. And here's the sense I think, and I'm not entirely sure, but this is starting to emerge for me, especially as I speak to people who were outright abused or abandoned as children and who have decided not to be in relationship with their parents. But it's also true for me, I think. Now, in your case, your father says he's done that work and he's left that behind. That's great. The proof of that will be in his behavior, not in his statements, not in his declarations, but in his actual behavior. Now, you can't control how he behaves in the rest of his life, and maybe you see things about how he's behaving in the rest of his life that trigger you. Well, that's really none of your business. That's his business. And there are ways in which the way my dad sometimes speaks to my mom, or the way he treats other people, or the way I see him conducting his life, which have nothing to do with me. And the part of me that gets up in arms about it is still the hurt kid. And I'm taking things personally that actually have nothing to do with me. So that's very important to realize if I'm going to grow up. And there are things that do have to do with me because they're happening in our relationship. Now, even there, it's possible to say, well, don't take it personally. That's true in the sense of he doesn't mean to do it. It's not my fault that he's doing it. It's maybe not his fault that he's doing it. But in every other relationship in my life, my personal development means developing boundaries and saying no when things happen and letting people know clearly and having healthy anger. I mean, hell, that's one of the 4 A's of healing that he writes about in the book we wrote. He certainly advocates it for everyone else in the world. Well, excuse me if I'm still figuring out what healthy anger is, and I'm learning what it is because I can feel the difference. The unhealthy anger is choked and vindictive and trying to hurt him as revenge. The healthy anger has vulnerability to it, but it's no less fierce. And if he doesn't like it, that ain't my problem. It comes from respecting myself and insisting on having my boundaries honored and having my feelings considered, as I would expect in any relationship as an adult. And the fact is, as I said, behaviors is where the rubber meets the road. Well, there are certain behaviors that are direct. They're not just reminiscent of when I was a kid. They're direct continuations of what I went through when I was a kid. And they're direct continuations of the things that hurt me the most. And what hurt me the most is not what he thinks hurt me the most. What hurt me the most is the things that hurt me the most. And I'm realizing that things like not keeping his word, going back on his word when he feels differently, focusing on the fact that he doesn't like the way I communicated something as a way of not hearing in good faith what I'm saying, appealing to his moods, or sort of excusing what he does as the alibi of I'm tired, or it was a crazy week, which, some people call gaslighting. It's your problem if you're upset because I'm not accountable for it. That lack of accountability, I don't have to take it personally in the sense of my dad hates me. I don't have to make up a story about it. Oh, and the other thing is trying to make restitution by appealing to his loving feelings. This happened recently where before he acknowledged and received my angry communication, he was in effect trying to kind of push it off or defer to be like, everything's okay because you are much loved. That's what he wrote. You are much loved over here. And I just said, that doesn't wash. I don't care how you feel about me. I want you to respect me. And until I know that you heard what I said and that it matters to you to respect it enough to respond to it, to get it, to have maybe some compassion for me as your son, not some syrupy, I love you. I truly don't care. I mean, it's nice to know, but in that moment, it doesn't make a difference because what he's subtly saying, or at least what I take from it, is don't be so mad at me. I'm your father and I love you. Well, that's a direct continuation of not taking accountability, not repairing. Okay, now, do I get more angry at him than someone else if they did that? Yes. Is that a double standard? I don't think so. I think it's completely understandable. I don't think it could be otherwise unless I try to contort my mind into some kind of spiritual pretzel and gaslight myself into thinking it's fucking possible that it's not going to be more hurtful to me when my father does it. Now, if I can get to that place of equanimity, fine, great, with integrity. But that's not where I am. And, I'm in therapy myself. And what's emerging for me is this relationship will be founded on my self-respect or it will be bullshit. And I'm not going to settle for less. And I'm going to take the risk that that'll result in a less close or less frequently, a relationship with less contact maybe. It's not what I want, but I'm willing to torch even our working collaboration. I'm not going to write a book about adult parent-child relationships that's predicated on me selling out on myself. Now, I don't think that's going to have to happen because I actually do, and I told him this, I trust him actually. And I trust in his love for me in a deeper sense and his respect for himself and his desire for the truth. And I respect my own ability to get across what I need. And some things about him will never change. And if I don't accept that, I'm being insane because some things about me will probably never change. And he's 79 years old. So my brother has had to remind me, maybe it's not reasonable to expect this to change. And that's true. So I have to watch my reactions and be discerning. But I'm learning that being responsible doesn't just mean saying, oh, it's all on me. Yeah, you know what else is on me? Admitting when I'm angry and taking a look and seeing what's that anger about and what can I do about it. And sometimes what needs to be done is to get it across and insist on it being heard. And if it's not, there are consequences to that for the relationship, just not punishment. But it would affect any relationship if an important communication wasn't heard. So it's a very delicate balance. And I'm not even sure I'm right about it. Like, I'm not even sure what I'm saying is true. But at the moment, I don't see any way around it. And it feels empowering on some level. And my therapist agrees with me, so I'll go with it for now.
Yeah, there's
Of course, I pay her to agree with me, but that's not true. She disagrees with me all the time.
Yeah.
But she acknowledges the emergence of an advocate in me for my core self that's not about reacting like a little toddler, but also isn't going to react like a scared, cowed, intimidated son. You're going to be a man about it. And sometimes men wrestle their fathers. That's, look at fucking Greek mythology killed his father. And he killed his father in a way because he denied the prophecy that he would. He had, Oedipus had enough hubris. I'm reinterpreting this a little bit, but he wouldn't look at that side of him, nor the side that wanted to fuck his mother, own her in a sense, steal her from his father. So what we don't examine, what we don't, inspect, tends to come back to bite us.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's my answer to that.
I think that's a key piece though, is the willingness to inspect and to stay flexible in the inspection. Like, as you said, dogma is the destruction.
It is dogma, is the destruction. But what do you think of what I said about the whole anger piece and drawing the line when it comes to behaviors that are unacceptable continuations of things that were wounding in the first place? Because for me, the wound isn't completely disinfected. And it may there's going to be scar tissue, and it may smart my whole life. There might be an extra, a bruise, and I don't want that poked.
Well, thank you for asking the question. And there's it's a beautiful topic that you've raised, and I still also am learning what is healthy anger. I still don't really 100%. I don't know what it feels like in myself. I really like your explanations about it, and I'm like, what does that actually look like when I'm angry? Because anger has such an association with power and domination in my own storyline, and rage, and like control, and like I'm the one who's angry, so I'm going to crush everything else in my anger. Saying that, this piece around boundaries and around acknowledging, hey, the patterns that are happening now don't work for me now, and drawing boundaries around that. I'm actually going through something like that as well, which I don't know that I can go into too much detail, but there's some dynamics within my family. I know we've gone into so much detail, but
I'm saying maybe I shouldn't have. I'm sitting here questioning whether it's appropriate, but I do think that, we both signed up for this, so it's fine.
Exactly. Yeah. And I guess I will preface it with honoring my dad, because I think it's what you expressed earlier. So many people will never get to have a conversation like this with their dads, whereas I get to have conversations like this anytime I want with my dad. And that's a really big difference. And I admire him greatly. And he is an example to me of an elder who's a good elder. And I'm grateful for him and proud of him. And that's kind of the foundation of our relationship at this time for me. And saying that, there is a piece right now in our family dynamic where the feminine and the masculine, the men and the women, on a very practical level, there is a split that has happened and has been happening specifically with my dad and my mom. They haven't had an actual proper conversation of like two adults acknowledging their history and just being okay to be the fact that they're going to be parents together for the rest of their lives. That's only come to me recently, this insight that they don't get to check out of that responsibility as co-parents. They have checked out of it, and it's causing, I think, massive ripples within our entire family structure, the entire context of our family.
Are there any children left to parent?
No. So I'm the eldest, and then there's my brother Josh and my sister Lucinda, and that's the first marriage, and then more marriages. My mom had another daughter. My dad's second wife had 2 kids from her previous husband. So it gets complicated. And anyway, so the thing is that I feel like my dad, there's a responsibility that I perceive, and again, this is my perception, this is my judgment on it, this is my view, is that there is a piece that he isn't owning. That is a piece of responsibility and accountability, that word that you use, which I really believe in, and that he's unwilling to go to. And we've had deep conversations about this, and for him, it's just not something that he feels that he wants to prioritize or really even maybe believes. And it's a piece that I'm struggle with, because at times it comes out in the way he speaks about what happened during the divorce, or what happened with my mom, and what happened. And what I've started doing is that at that point, I would just say, if you want to get into this, like, I'm available to get into it. And there are aspects here that I think are really not being looked at that are very important, that I will call you out on. And I've called him out on it many times. And I'm even wary of that term, calling him out. I'm acknowledging there's a piece there that feels messy, dirty to me, poisonous actually, It's an, like you said, an unclean wound, and to clean the wound, there has to be a willingness to actually look at it and get into it.
Yeah, that's a very interesting situation. I mean, I do this thing called mental chiropractic, or I take walks with people. And if you came to me with that, I would have some things to say about your perspective on it, which is maybe totally, and maybe you'd have things to say about mine, but I guess I'm the guest on your podcast. So, but that's a tricky position to be in, for sure. I hear that.
Yeah, it is a tricky situation to be in.
Because
I'd be curious to hear. Do you want to share? I mean, if you want to share something, share it, man. Like we're here. Let's do this thing.
Sure. Well, remember I said that there were things about the way my dad conducts his life now that are none of my business, and that I couldn't do anything about if I tried, and that I'm only going to get frustrated. I can have my judgments, I can have my opinions, my assessments, but they just are of no consequence. All I have is my conditions, my standards, my boundaries, which is another totally overused word, but let's use it. From what I can see, unless there's some other exigent circumstance you're not saying, your dad's relationship itself with your mother is his business. But just let me say this. There is no co-parenting happening now, nor will there ever be. There may be co-grandparenting, but that doesn't require any co. They don't need to be parents anymore. He's your father, she's your mother, but parents parent. Parenting is a verb, and there's no more parenting to do. There's being a mother of adult kids. There's being a father of adult kids. They don't need each other to do that, and you don't need them, and you never will again need them to be on side together. Now, if you're having family events together that require their cooperation, collaboration, and coexistence, well, that's a different thing. But I would be wary of the part of you that's looking to redeem a past that will never come back. That made you that you suffered from. It sounds to me like that is an old wound. That, trauma is not what happens to you; it's what happens inside you. And divorce is traumatic, but something happened inside you, and there's a need that was unfulfilled. And that when your father says what he says, obviously, of course, it's going to upset you. Of course, it's going to sting. Now, that doesn't mean you just have to sit there and take it. You can say, "Dad, I don't want to hear about it." But that's different than saying, if you want to get into it, this is poisonous and I'm going to call you out. Well, you're already getting into it by saying that.
Yeah,
the way
absolutely.
to not get into it is to say, the minute that topic comes up, I'm hanging up because I can't manage myself to listen clearly. It's just too loaded for me.
Well, so to me, it's a piece around, and thank you. There's definitely more context here. So one of the pieces is my sister Lucinda, who's 5 years younger than me, lives in the States, and she's we are estranged, not by my choice, by her choice, for some years now. And a part of it, the kind of initial motivation around it was around my dad and some of the sort of behaviors there, and then it became me. And for further context, my sister Lucinda and I were absolute best friends for many, many years, like deep. And I think in many ways she hero worshipped me. So I also understand the rebound from that of like, Nathan's not perfect, how dare he? And that she's processing that in her own way. And I honor and respect her 100%. And I feel like that is a part of this bigger picture where my parents, so the fact you mentioned events, like I'm going to get married sometime soon. I'm going to have a kid with my lovely lady, and we're going to have these big events. And for the rest of my life, as long as my parents don't get their shit together enough just to have a fucking conversation and have some kind of amicable thing, I have to deal with it forever. And it so infuriates me. I don't care about what happened then, but they clearly still do.
Why are you going to have to deal with it?
Well, I don't. I mean, I could just uninvite them from the events, which I really don't want to do. And then I suppose that's my choice as an adult to invite my parents to my wedding.
That's one option. That's one option. The other option is to invite them to have someone else who's your wedding planner organize it so that damage is minimized, and to say to them, I'm not dealing with this. It's my wedding. I request that you find a way to have it be this way at a minimum, peaceful, tranquil, whatever. It would be really upsetting to me if this spilled over. And that's all I'm going to say about it, because I can't afford to get embroiled in this anymore, and I can't help you guys.
That's an option.
See, the having to deal with it, the compulsive needing to get involved could be, I'm not saying it is, it could be still the hurt preteen teenager in you, or even younger, because people don't get divorced out of the blue, right? That who took on the coping role of trying to make peace, trying to be the bridge or whatever. Sometimes my mom will talk to me about what's going on with my dad, but I have to be very careful. Am I able to listen to her just as a person and reflect back to her what I hear going on for her without, letting it seep into my view of him? Do I, or of her, can I support as a family member without being invested in the outcome? And it sounds like that's very, very difficult for you. And you resent getting involved. And anything that you resent is probably optional.
I love that.
That would be my, like anything that you resent, because resentment means doing something you don't want to do under the pretext of having to do it. And, resent, I think in French, is ressentir, which means to feel again, to feel again and again the things that you didn't feel in the first place, which is like, fuck no. So I don't know. I mean, you'd have to see what's available to you in that way of looking at it, because the proof is in the pudding. Like when I do mental chiropractic walks with people, I'm not trying to convince them what the truth is. I have no advice to give. But if they're stuck, I want to give them access to a different point of view and say, okay, well, is that closer to what my intentions are than the frustration and stuckness I was feeling before? So this isn't one of those sessions, but that's probably where I would take the conversation.
Well, thank you for offering that. And actually, I think more than anything, the idea of resentment and resentment being a choice has offered me an insight into my own part about this. So,
resentment is not a choice. It's a consequence of choices.
Right. So
no one chooses it.
Yeah.
It's a natural consequence. In fact, it's a natural consequence of acting like you don't have a choice.
Right.
It's a consequence of choicelessness. Theoretically, we have a choice. But when we act as if we don't have a choice, we're not claiming a choice. We can't see it, so we don't claim it. Now, there's a part of us that gets a payoff from that, because if I don't have a choice, then I'm not responsible. But I'm not going to tell someone they're doing that on purpose. It seems to me that resentment is the consequence of not knowing how, or not making it important enough to step into choice. Because the minute we choose, we can't resent anymore. I chose it.
Because we're responsible. Right. It's owning the responsibility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is the only access to happiness and self-respect in the world. But that doesn't mean we're going to do that, because who wants to give up being right?
That sounds really uncomfortable. I don't think I'm in for that. It's actually one of my favorite things is that moment where I go from righteousness, I've so got this, to actually just hearing someone and being like, oh wow, that sounds really, wow, I really hear you. Thank you so much for that. It's like this big relief actually every time.
Of course
it's
it is.
letting go of this huge fucking effortful, energetic identity that I've been carrying. It's a fantastic feeling, but I've very rarely, if ever, has it been like easy to get to that point.
And I think in some ways that demarcation line can sometimes be the line between being angry and giving up the anger. Sometimes it can be the demarcation line between unhealthy and healthy anger. Like in the case of my, copious emails to my father last week, the first one I sent was just full of vitriol and sarcasm. I'm like, well, you got what you wanted. I'm more upset now. That's bad faith. That's taking him in bad faith and being the victim and resenting as if I don't have a choice. And then he wrote back to me like, I'm not going to take this. Like, this is bullshit. And something clued into me. I'm like, well, maybe he's not meaning to hurt me. Maybe he actually doesn't understand what I'm saying. Maybe I've never said this because I haven't really seen it. Okay. Good faith then. I'm going to assume he does want to know. Some part of him wants to know, even if in this moment he can't take it. I'm going to write it out. And I was able to end the second email by saying, I'm only telling you this because I love you too. And I respect you. And so it's worth it to me. I give a shit, and I'm going to bother. Other people wouldn't bother with their father. because they just have a dim view of the possibilities. I don't. And that felt to me nutritious. That felt because there was grief mixed in with the anger. And that's what I wasn't being responsible before. I was trying to push away my grief and instead just, and grief that is skated over or ossified becomes grievance. So, again, I don't want to fetishize peace in the valley. I don't want to turn, I shouldn't be angry, or I'm not, when I'm fully spiritually enlightened, I'm not going to be angry. No. When I'm as enlightened as I want to be, I'm going to see my anger for what it is. I'm going to see the opportunities to communicate it. I'm going to see what doesn't need to be communicated, or just what I can't expect to change. And I'll make peace with that.
Wow. Well, thank you, Daniel. I did not expect us to, we've basically had, the first question has guided this entire conversation, and we're already over an hour. It's
Isn't
amazing.
that the best?
It's such a great conversation. And I think for me, it's an honoring of the, at least for me, I speak for myself, for my father-son connection and my lineage of men, and the work that my dad and I are both doing. And from my perspective, the work that you and your dad are doing to make a change in the story. And I really honor this conversation for that.
Yeah, I would love to thank you for that. And I honor the work you and your father are doing as well. It sounds beautiful, and it's going to look different than mine, But if we can contribute, if all of us can contribute to broadening the horizons and possibilities for this somewhat inescapable relationship that's, again, totally unique, and, busting through this, it is what it is, resignation that so many people fall into, because the truth is, you don't really need to have any kind of relationship with your parents or with your adult child. You're done, you're cooked. There's no more development that needs to happen in that relationship, and there's no more caretaking that needs to happen. And someday someone's going to die, and you'll have to deal with that, and then you'll deal with that, and that's it. But that's just part of life. What about the decades in between? What's possible there? What would it mean for families if we took it on with some degree of consciousness and like something was possible? You may be cooked, but the relationship isn't. The relationship's always growing and expanding and changing.
Yeah, well, thank you. I want to take a few more minutes to kind of just ask one or two quick questions, and then we'll go to the little private round for the supporters of the podcast. And I really want to touch on this to honor your work, is that you have this book, The Myth of Normal, and you use some words in there, just in the title, around, you use the words toxic culture. And so I don't want to spend too much time, but just the title of your book, I'm like, oh my God, I could literally talk about this for hours. And I kind of, anyway, so there's a sadness in me that I don't get that opportunity today. And I also have really loved our conversation. So if you could summarize even just the title for me, the idea of why is it normal a myth? And that might be too big a question, but also why is I can
bottom line it.
Yeah.
I can bottom line it. I mean, first of all, it's easy for me to sum this up because these are my dad's theses. This is his fundamental. I helped flesh it out and express it in more enjoyable to read ways, but but the intellectual property of it really mostly belongs to him, and that's why my name is in a smaller font and the preposition with is used as opposed to and with regards to my contribution. That's exactly how it should be on this book. So full credit to him. Normal is a myth because the myth about normal, you could say, I mean, that would be an alternate title, is that whatever is normal is also natural.
Yeah.
And healthy. We get used to things. Human beings are remarkably adaptable. We can live in all kinds of environments, but that doesn't mean that the things we adapt to are good for us or that the adaptations themselves are sustainable. Certainly, the adaptations guarantee our survival in the short term. So if I become someone who can't express his anger because expressing anger is going to threaten the relationship with the people I need, well, that gets me out of childhood intact somewhat. But there are fault lines and fractures in me that they're going to express themselves as my bones grow and as myself grows. And as I move through life, being authentic to myself, feeling what's inside me expressing all my emotions is going to become more important than holding on to this or that relationship when I'm an adult. So there are many things in our culture that are normalized, made invisible, sometimes even praised and lauded and rewarded, like overwork or being super nice or whatever else, that are actually really bad for us. They have physical and mental consequences. And that's what the book details. It's not just a screed. There's all kinds of scientific evidence for what we're saying. So, yeah, the myth of normal basically is that what we see is what's supposed to be. And that takes some 500 pages to unpack because, as Noam Chomsky said in the political media space, if you're going to go on a mainstream television program and you have 4 minutes in between commercials to talk about U.S. foreign policy, well, you can't get any counter-hegemonic view across with that concision requirement. You can only repeat the same normal things that people say. But if you actually want to bust up a myth, you got to take some time to show people that it is a myth and then unpack why it's a myth and what the consequences are. And then you can say, well, what are the alternative views? So that's the myth of normal, I would say. Yeah, well, so the flip side of that also is there's a myth of abnormal, which says that some people are, people with mental illness, people with addiction, people with, there are people who get cancer and there are people who get multiple sclerosis and there are people who are bipolar and there are people who are addicted. And those people have abnormal problems. I mean, when I did a psychology degree 25 years ago, which I did nothing with, there was a course called abnormal psychology. Well, that presumes that there's a normal against which these people are judged, as opposed to a spectrum of ways that we cope. And some of them are socially sanctioned and some of them are not. Some of them disrupt our lives in different ways. But they all have consequences for ourselves and others. So, abnormal is also a myth. As far as toxic culture goes, the word toxic has become a sort of pop psychological word, toxic masculinity, toxic this, toxic that, a toxic personality. Well, toxic actually only is a relative term. Toxic to whom or toxic to what? Because what is toxic, peanut butter is toxic to a dog, but not to a human. I'm thinking of peanut butter, maybe dark chocolate, something like that. Yeah, chocolate. Okay. Peanuts are toxic to someone with a peanut allergy, but they're not toxic to me. So toxic doesn't mean bad or morally wrong. It means not good for the thing. And the word culture itself has a biochemical meaning. If we raise microbes in a solution in a petri dish, we call that solution a culture. That's why you have active kombucha cultures or yogurt cultures, because those probiotic bacteria were raised, they were cultured. So a culture can be healthy to a certain organism or not healthy. And what we're saying is that these things that are normalized in this culture, in fact, foundational, they arise from the foundational principles of the culture. For instance, that human beings are atomized individuals who are only looking for their individual, quote unquote, self-interest without respect to the collective. That's a complete, evolutionary speaking, that's a fucking blasphemous lie. It's just not true. That's not how we evolved at all. We evolved to be collective and interdependent, and that self-interest meant the needs of the community as well, or it included it. So if a culture is based on falsehoods about what's good for us, well, then it's going to be toxic to us, not good for us, and it's going to have physical and mental consequences and also societal consequences. Suicide rates, mass shootings, unhappiness, economic insecurity, crazy inequality, war and militarism even. It's going to be self-destructive in the end. And what we're saying is that all these things are not they're a feature, not a bug of the way we live.
Man, thank you so much for summarizing, for illustrating or for giving a little. It's almost like take a quick photograph of a view, and then I would love to dive into the picture with you. But perhaps we'll have to get you on another time and there. I will
Yeah,
share a little more.
I'd love to talk more about my mental chiropractic work and my
Definitely
podcast, which are the two things I have to plug that don't have to do with my father.
Well, why don't you plug those now, and then I want to talk with you about in the after chat for the patrons. I really want to talk about lyrics with you, about your Let's Get Lyrical podcast. So give a bit of a plug to those things, please. And actually, it's a good time to let people know like how they can find more of you and why they might want to work with you, etc.
So I mentioned my mental chiropractic work before. That is a service that I call Take a Walk with Daniel. You can find it at walkwithdaniel.com. And if the explanation I'm about to give is not sufficient to understand what the hell I'm talking about, you can book a free 15-minute consultation call. Call that Talk with Daniel. But the main thing I do is I take walks with people. People come to me with one specific thing in their life that is currently stuck, that they'd like to get unstuck about, meaning they're in a situation where they feel choiceless about the point of view they have about it. They can only see it one way. And that might clash with everything they know or everything they believe, but they're still stuck with it, and it's not helping them deal with the situation effectively. So it's not like, I have daddy issues or commitment issues. I'd say go see a therapist in that case. But I'm seeing my dad next week, and I'm dreading it, and I can't sleep. Well, you're stuck about that. So we take a walk, literally. They walk where they are. I walk where I am. If we happen to be in the same city, we do it in person, but the vast majority of my clients are living all over the world and not in New York. And I have a conversation to guide them towards a different, more flexible, creative, supple, enjoyable point of view, which is kind of like what a chiropractor does with the spine. Alignment. I'm trying to get them aligned with their actual intentions, not stuck in some kind of compressed or pinched or disordered way of looking at it. So that's walkwithdaniel.com. And I really enjoy it. The only reason I do it is because I enjoy it. I don't do more than one walk a day. I'm not trying to make myself a mental health practitioner or something. It's not it's not where my identity largely lives. I'm a musical theater composer and lyricist, and I run this podcast, and I have a lot of other things on the go, including writing the books, but I love doing this with people. Gets me outside for an hour and a half every day, and I like guiding people to a moment of crystalline clarity. It really enriches my life. So, and this other thing that people can check out is a podcast, relatively new. We're only 4 episodes in at the time of this recording, called Let's Get Lyrical with Carice and Daniel. So Daniel is me, and Carice is Carice Van Houten, who Game of Thrones fans will know as Melisandre, the Red Sorceress. And I confess I haven't watched much Game of Thrones, and when I tried, I couldn't follow it or get interested in it, but I know she's great, and she's been in a lot of other stuff too. She played Tom Cruise's wife in the World War II film Valkyrie. She was in a Paul Verhoeven film in Dutch, and very celebrated actress actually in Holland. And we met recently via her interest in the myth of normal, actually, and we became fast friends. And I told her that I had formerly had, or I still do, but I don't really do it anymore, a YouTube channel all about lyrics called Lyrics to Go. And I said, just on the spur of the moment, do you want to do a podcast with me about this? Because she had expressed a love for songs and lyrics. And she said, sure. So it's a show where we pick a different theme every week. We might maybe do, episodes focused around this or that artist, but we just listen to some songs and we break down the lyrics and we riff on them. We react to them, respond to them, talk about how they relate to our view of the world or our lives. And I'm loving it. It's just a real blast. So people can check that out on Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts or Spotify. We have a YouTube channel where we post select clips from the episode. Like we have a Patreon where if people subscribe for $5 a month, they can get full video access to extended versions of every episode and, unlimited replays of our live streams. We had my dad on the live stream last Friday talking about trauma, illness, and healing songs. Nice. So we did the Beatles, Kelly Clarkson, Nirvana, Suzanne Vega, Johnny Cash, the rapper LP from Run the Jewels, and who else? Oh yeah, Kendrick Lamar and Paul Simon. And there were a whole bunch we didn't get to, like Metallica, Faith No More, just a bunch of stuff, but we'll have to have him back for part 2. And it was fun.
Amazing.
So
dude,
that's all there too.
That's so rad. So little did you know, but my great love of like the one thread that has run through my entire life since I was, I don't know, as long as I can remember, is lyrics. I've been learning lyrics to songs since I was about 7 years old. I know more lyrics to more songs than anyone I've thus far met, although I have a feeling you may also have that tendency. And I actually
man, the silver medal is nothing to sniff at.
I was a professional singer-songwriter for around 10 years before this current manifestation of what I'm doing. And so anyway, Let's get into that in the post. Like the one more very important question I must ask before I forget is, when you hear the words, "we are already free,"
yeah,
what does that bring up for you?
Well, that in any circumstance where we experience ourselves as not free, an alternate perspective is available or possible. We may not be free to see it immediately, because it's a paradox. In some ways, we are not already free until we are. We don't have a choice until we do. But there is a world in which nothing needs to change in the outside world, and we don't experience being stuck. And that's what my mental chiropractic walks are for. Nothing has changed by the end of the walk in the situation. The other person hasn't changed. The job hasn't changed. The neuroses haven't changed. But the perspective has. And it leaves a person with an actual freedom to do something about it. So, yeah, I would think of it as a reframing. And I learned this did I learn this? Yeah. Well, look, I was in jail in Mexico for 3.5 weeks a couple of years ago, and then I got deported. It was an immigration thing. I overstayed my tourist visa, and I got randomly picked up on a bus. And there were moments in there, very much in the first week or so, and beyond, where I was not free at all. I was the victim of my circumstances, and I was pissed off about it, and I was coping strenuously in various ways, which was interesting in itself, getting to see the ways that I cope with adversity. And there were other times when I was choosing to be where I was, not liking it, but I wasn't suffering about it. And not only that, but I was coming to realizations about my life that were making me believe in myself more. And I was really remarking on my own resilience and finding resources in me beyond my own personality that I respected and that felt like they had integrity. And I had COVID in there. 2 weeks of my sojourn there was a COVID so-called quarantine. Of course, I was stuffed into a tiny area with 23 other guys, but that experience taught me something about that freedom is available in a sense. And I'm far from the first person who's been confined or incarcerated in any sort of way. And it was a pretty mild in terms of the conditions. It's not like I was, running away from big tattooed guys who wanted to do something to me. It was very friendly. It was mostly small Peruvian guys or Ecuadorian guys who were shorter than me. I'm pretty short, trying to get to the States. But whether it's Malcolm X or Viktor Frankl, Primo Levi, guys who were in the concentration camps, finding some kind of freedom in the most unfree circumstances. I would say that there is freedom available even when our bodies aren't free, even when our lives aren't free. And that doesn't minimize the need for physical, material freedom. And it shouldn't obviate, then it shouldn't turn into a kind of gaslighting. Well, everyone's free anyway. It's all in how you look at it. So we don't need to tackle poverty or inequality or, climate disaster or whatever. No, we got to do something good with our freedom so that more people have the freedom to realize their freedom.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much, brother. I'm excited to jump into a thing or two more in the after talk. But other than that, just thank you so much for being on the We Are Already Free podcast. And it's an absolute blessing to have you here. Thank you.
Mutually so. Thank you so much for having me.
What an incredible journey we've had with Daniel Maté today. Thank you so much, Daniel. What a blessing. You can find links to all Daniel's good work at alreadyfree.me/28. That's the number 28. plus a bunch of the other stuff we discussed, links and fun things like that. And guess what? There is even more. I had a fun bonus conversation with Daniel after our main recording where we dived even deeper into something, although we didn't dive into this at all in the episode, but we dived into the art of songwriting, the power of lyrics, discussing songs like The Temptation of Adam, Donald Fagen's New Frontier, and many others. If you enjoyed this episode and can't wait to hear more from Daniel, or if you're into lyrics at all as much as I am, you won't want to miss this exclusive bonus content. To gain access, just become a patron. There's a link at the show notes, alreadyfree.me/28. By becoming a patron, not only will you unlock this enthralling extra conversation with Daniel Maté, but you'll also gain access to a wealth of bonus content and the chance to connect with like-minded listeners in our community. Don't miss out, lovely listener. Head over to the Patreon page and join us as we continue our journey towards understanding growth and the freedom that lies within each of us. alreadyfree.me/2828. See you there. And one last little personal note. This has been a very, very intense episode. If you're still listening to this, I super appreciate you. Not many people listen all the way to the end. And I just want to check in and say, if you are feeling some of the heaviness, some of the intensity, feeling some of your own challenges and blocks in your life that you're going through because of your own journey with intense parental figures or intense society positioning itself as a parental figure, I would super love to support you. So please do reach out. You can still just go to alreadyfree.me/28. There are always links there where you can send me a personal message. I will reply. I would love to have a conversation with you. I'd love to see where you're at and see how I can serve you in moving through those blocks, because you came here to be already free. You are already free. And sometimes all we need is just a reminder of that, just the support in the reflection of the mirror of another. I'd be honored. Thank you for being on this journey. It's an absolute blessing to be here with you. I'll see you next week.